They called him a thief before anyone bothered to learn the truth. On a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, Daniel Carter walked into the glass headquarters of Bennett Financial Group, carrying nothing more dangerous than a coffee cup and a worn leather briefcase. By lunchtime, his reputation would be shattered. By sunset, people who had known him for years would look at him differently. And by the end of the week, almost nobody would remember the quiet man who had spent 8 years helping keep the company running. The city outside moved with its usual rhythm. Taxis filled the streets. Office workers hurried through intersections beneath gray clouds. Inside the 42nd floor offices of Bennett Financial, everything appeared normal. Computers hummed softly. Phones rang. Employees moved between meetings carrying reports and laptops. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension had already begun spreading through the building. Someone had discovered a discrepancy in a company account. A large amount of money had gone missing. Not enough to threaten the company itself, but more than enough to trigger concern. Rumors traveled faster than facts. They always did. Daniel sat quietly at his desk reviewing quarterly reports. At 41 years old, he had become the kind of employee most companies claimed to value. Dependable, honest, consistent. He arrived early, stayed late when necessary, avoided office politics. Most importantly, he never forgot why he worked so hard. A framed photograph sat beside his monitor. It showed his 12-year-old daughter Emma smiling during a school science fair. Every difficult day seemed easier when he looked at that picture. Across town, Emma was sitting in a classroom preparing for an afternoon presentation. She had no idea that her father's life was about to change. Daniel certainly did not know either. Around 10:30, a message appeared on his computer screen. Human Resources requested an immediate meeting. The note felt unusual, but not alarming. Meetings happened all the time. Daniel saved his work, straightened his tie, and walked toward the executive conference room. As he approached, something felt different. Conversations stopped when he passed certain desks. People avoided eye contact. A few employees looked away entirely. The atmosphere carried a strange heaviness. Inside the conference room, several executives were already seated. Human Resources representatives occupied one side of the table. Security personnel stood quietly near the door. At the far end sat Olivia Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, founder, one of the most respected business leaders in the city. She rarely attended internal disciplinary meetings. The moment Daniel saw her, uneasiness settled into his stomach. Olivia's expression remained cold and professional. A folder rested on the table in front of her. Nobody offered Daniel coffee. Nobody asked about his day. Small details often revealed larger truths. "Please sit down," someone said. Daniel obeyed. The room felt unusually silent. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Far below, traffic continued moving through wet streets. Life outside carried on normally. Inside, everything had paused. Olivia opened the folder. Her voice remained calm, controlled. "Daniel, there appears to be a serious issue involving company funds." Daniel frowned slightly. "What kind of issue?" Another executive slid several documents across the table. Numbers, transactions, account records. Daniel studied them carefully. The information looked familiar, yet something about it felt incomplete. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, another voice spoke. "The missing funds were accessed using your credentials." The words landed heavily. For a moment, Daniel simply stared at the papers. Confusion replaced concern. Then disbelief followed. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above the city. Inside the conference room, every eye remained fixed on him. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked uncertain. It was as though a decision had already been made before he entered the room. And somewhere beneath the growing silence, Daniel realized that this meeting was not about finding answers. It was about assigning blame. Daniel Carter looked around the conference room and saw something that hurt more than the accusation itself. He saw certainty. Not one person appeared interested in hearing his explanation. The documents remained spread across the table like a verdict already delivered. Rain continued tapping against the windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Somewhere below, thousands of people moved through their ordinary day. Up here, Daniel's life was quietly coming apart. "There has to be a mistake," he said calmly. Olivia Bennett folded her hands on the table. Her expression revealed nothing. "The transactions were authorized through your employee credentials." Daniel studied the paperwork again. The account numbers looked familiar because he worked with them regularly. Yet several details immediately felt wrong. Dates seemed unusual. Access times did not match his normal schedule. Certain approval chains were missing. He opened his mouth to explain, but another executive interrupted. Security reviewed the records. The room became silent. Daniel looked from one face to another. Human resources representatives avoided eye contact. Security officers stood motionless near the door. The atmosphere felt less like a meeting and more like a ceremony. A ceremony marking the end of trust. "I did not take any money," Daniel said. His voice never rose. He never pounded the table. He never demanded sympathy. The quiet dignity in his words somehow made the situation even more painful. Olivia slid a document toward him. "We have enough evidence to proceed with termination." The sentence landed heavily. 8 years of loyalty reduced to a single page of paperwork. Daniel stared at the termination form. He thought about the overtime hours, the weekends spent helping during audits, the projects nobody else wanted. None of it seemed to matter now. "You are making a mistake," he said softly. Olivia held his gaze. "I hope not." Those 3 words hurt more than anger ever could. Daniel signed the paperwork because refusing would change nothing. The decision had already been made. The company laptop was collected. Access credentials were disabled. Security procedures began moving forward with cold efficiency. Within 20 minutes, Daniel found himself placing personal belongings into a cardboard box. Family photograph, coffee mug, a few framed certificates, small pieces of a life he had built one workday at a time. Outside the conference room, news traveled quickly. Employees watched from their desks. Conversations stopped when Daniel passed. Some people looked shocked. Others looked disappointed. A few looked relieved that they were not the ones being escorted out. Nobody approached him. Nobody asked questions. Rumors had already done their work. Daniel carried the box toward the elevator. The walk felt longer than any hallway should. Each step seemed to echo through the office. 8 years ago, he had entered this building full of hope. Now he was leaving beneath a cloud of suspicion. As the elevator doors opened, he glanced back one final time. Most employees quickly looked away. A few continued staring. The silence followed him downstairs. 42 floors later, the lobby doors opened onto a rainy afternoon. Daniel stepped outside holding the cardboard box beneath one arm. Cold winds swept through the city streets. Traffic moved past without noticing him. The world had not changed. Yet everything in his own life suddenly felt uncertain. His phone vibrated. A message from Emma. "Good luck at work today, Dad. Do not forget my science project tonight." A small smile appeared despite everything. Emma had no idea what happened. She still believed her father could solve any problem. The thought nearly broke his heart. Daniel sat inside his aging sedan parked across the street and stared through the rain-covered windshield. For several minutes, he simply sat there. Not angry, not defeated, just trying to understand how quickly a person's reputation could disappear. Back inside Bennett Financial, Olivia returned to her office overlooking the city. The matter seemed resolved. Company funds had disappeared. An employee appeared responsible. Action had been taken. Everything followed procedure. Yet as she reviewed documents at her desk, something continued bothering her. Not the evidence. Not the investigation. Daniel's reaction. Most guilty people argued, deflected, blamed others. Daniel had done none of those things. He had looked confused, hurt, almost disappointed. The memory lingered longer than she expected. Meanwhile, several miles away, Daniel started the engine and drove through the rain toward home. He still had one more difficult conversation waiting for him. And unlike the executives who had judged him, there was one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain streaked across the windshield in uneven patterns while Chicago's afternoon traffic crawled through the wet streets. Daniel Carter kept both hands on the steering wheel and his eyes fixed ahead. The cardboard box sat quietly on the passenger seat beside him. Every so often, he glanced toward the framed photograph of Emma resting among the office supplies he had carried out of Bennett Financial. 8 years of work reduced to a small collection of personal belongings. The realization lingered heavily in the silence. Yet what troubled him most was not losing the job. It was the accusation attached to it. Money could be replaced. Reputation was different. People remembered accusations long after they forgot explanations. When Daniel finally turned into the modest neighborhood where he and Emma lived, The rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. Small brick houses lined the street. Lawns glistened beneath gray skies. The familiar sight usually brought comfort. Today it only reminded him of the conversation waiting ahead. He parked in the driveway and remained seated for a moment. Through the front window, he could see Emma moving around the kitchen. She was probably working on her science project exactly as she promised. A knot formed in his chest. No parent ever wanted to be the reason their child worried. Yet there was no way to hide this. Eventually, he picked up the box and walked inside. The smell of tomato soup drifted from the kitchen. Emma looked up immediately and smiled. "You are home early." Daniel forced a small smile of his own. "Looks that way." Emma tilted her head. She noticed things quickly. Always had. Her eyes moved toward the cardboard box. The smile faded slightly. "What happened?" Daniel set the box on the dining room table. For several seconds, he searched for the right words. There were none. Only honest ones. "I lost my job today." The room became very quiet. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Emma stared at him. "Why?" Daniel looked away briefly. The answer felt almost impossible to say aloud. "Someone believes I took money from the company." Emma blinked several times as if trying to process what she had heard. Then something remarkable happened. She did not ask if it was true. She did not hesitate. "But you did not." Daniel felt emotion tighten in his throat. "No, I did not." Emma nodded immediately. Complete trust. Absolute certainty. The kind only a child can offer. "Then they are wrong." Her answer arrived so quickly and so confidently that Daniel almost laughed despite everything. Almost. Instead, he sat beside her at the kitchen table. Emma reached across and squeezed his hand. It was a small gesture, yet somehow it carried more support than anything he had received all day. Later that evening, while Emma finished her project, Daniel reviewed bills spread across the table. Mortgage payment, utility bills, insurance, school expenses. The numbers seemed larger now. Much larger. He still had some savings, but uncertainty had a way of making every dollar feel fragile. The future that once seemed predictable suddenly looked cloudy. Across the city, Olivia Bennett sat alone inside her office long after most employees had gone home. The skyline glowed beyond the windows. Normally, she appreciated the quiet. Tonight, something felt unsettled. She opened the investigation file again. Account logs, security reports, transaction records. Everything pointed toward Daniel. Yet the image of him sitting across the conference table continued returning to her mind. Not defensive, not angry, just confused. She disliked unresolved feelings. Facts were simpler. Facts provided certainty. Yet certainty felt strangely distant tonight. Meanwhile, Daniel tucked Emma into bed later than usual. She looked up at him from beneath the blanket. "You will find another job." Daniel smiled gently. "Maybe." Emma shook her head. "Not maybe. You always figure things out." Her faith in him felt both comforting and heartbreaking. After she fell asleep, Daniel stood quietly in the hallway outside her room. The house remained still. The future remained uncertain. Somewhere beyond the walls of that small home, a misunderstanding was already growing into something larger than either of them realized. And before long, life would place an unexpected test directly in Daniel's path. One that would reveal far more about a person's character than any investigation ever could. The next morning arrived beneath clear skies, but Daniel Carter felt none of the relief that sunshine usually brought. The alarm clock rang at 6:30 out of habit. For several seconds, he lay still, staring at the ceiling. Then reality returned. There was no office waiting for him. No reports to review. No 42nd floor conference room. Just uncertainty. The silence inside the house felt different now. He quietly prepared breakfast while Emma got ready for school. Neither mentioned the previous day at first. Some truths needed time to settle. Yet even in the middle of uncertainty, routine carried a strange kind of comfort. Emma sat at the kitchen table eating cereal while reviewing notes for class. Daniel poured coffee into his favorite mug, the same one he had carried home in the cardboard box. For a moment, everything almost felt normal. Almost. "Did you sleep?" Emma asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "A little." Emma studied him carefully. "You are worried. Children often notice things adults try to hide." Daniel nodded. "Maybe a little." Emma shrugged. "You always tell me that hard days do not last forever." The words caught him off guard because they were his own. Advice he had given her during difficult moments. Advice she now returned when he needed it most. Daniel laughed softly. I guess I did say that. Emma pointed a spoon toward him. Then maybe you should listen. After dropping her off at school, Daniel spent the morning updating his resume and searching job listings. Yet each application seemed to carry the same invisible obstacle. Background checks, references, employment verification. The accusation hanging over him felt heavier than unemployment itself. Even though no criminal charges existed, rumors had a way of following people. Around noon, he received 2 calls from former coworkers. Neither conversation lasted long. Both sounded uncomfortable. Both carefully avoided discussing what had happened. The distance hurt more than Daniel expected. 8 years working beside people. 8 years building trust. One accusation had erased most of it overnight. Across downtown Chicago, Olivia Bennett stood inside a boardroom presenting quarterly projections. Investors listened. Executives took notes. The company continued operating exactly as expected. From the outside, everything looked successful. Yet Olivia found herself distracted more than once. Her attention drifted back toward the investigation file sitting on her desk. Facts remained facts. Procedures had been followed. Yet something continued bothering her. During a short break between meetings, she opened the file again. She reviewed transaction timestamps, login records, security summaries. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion. Yet the conclusion felt strangely incomplete. Olivia disliked uncertainty. It made her uncomfortable. She had built her career on decisive action. Hesitation cost opportunities. Doubt weakened leadership. At least that was what she always believed. Still, Daniel's calm voice continued echoing in her memory. You are making a mistake. Meanwhile, late that afternoon, Olivia left headquarters carrying a packed schedule and an expensive leather handbag she rarely paid attention to. The bag traveled everywhere with her. Meetings, flights, conferences. It contained personal items, company documents, identification, financial records, and nearly everything necessary to navigate her demanding life. She moved quickly through the city, focused on phone calls and upcoming appointments. The day blurred together in its usual rush. One meeting led to another. One conversation replaced the last. By evening, she finally returned home exhausted. Only then did she realize something was wrong. Her handbag was gone. At first, she assumed it remained in the car, then perhaps her office, then maybe a conference room. But as minutes passed, concern transformed into alarm. Phone calls began immediately. Drivers were contacted. Security teams notified. Buildings checked. Staff members questioned. Nobody had seen it. The realization settled heavily in her chest. The bag contained far more than personal belongings. Sensitive information, financial documents, cash, items that could create enormous problems if they fell into the wrong hands. Across the city, Daniel stopped by a neighborhood grocery store after picking up Emma from school. Money felt tighter now, forcing him to count every purchase carefully. As they exited the store carrying a few bags, Daniel noticed something unusual near the edge of the parking lot. Resting beside a concrete divider was an expensive leather handbag, partially hidden from view. He slowed his steps. Emma noticed it too. Neither of them knew that the object sitting quietly beneath the fading evening light was about to place an extraordinary choice directly in front of them. Daniel Carter stopped walking the moment he saw the handbag. It rested beside the concrete divider as though someone had set it down for only a second and forgotten to return. Evening sunlight reflected softly from the polished leather. Cars moved through the grocery store parking lot. Shopping carts rattled across the pavement. Yet somehow the expensive bag seemed strangely out of place among ordinary families carrying groceries home for dinner. Emma noticed it immediately. Did someone lose that? She asked. Daniel set down 2 grocery bags and walked closer. The handbag looked expensive enough to belong in a corporate boardroom rather than a neighborhood parking lot. He carefully picked it up and glanced around. Nobody appeared to be searching for it. Nobody seemed concerned. People came and went without paying attention. Maybe we should turn it in, Emma said. Daniel nodded. Probably. Yet something about the situation felt unusual. The bag seemed heavy, much heavier than expected. He carried it toward a nearby bench beneath a light pole and carefully examined the exterior. No visible contact information appeared anywhere. Emma stood beside him watching curiously. Daniel hesitated. Normally, he would have taken it directly to store management. But something told him the owner would be desperately searching for it already. He slowly opened the bag, hoping to find identification. The moment he looked inside, he froze. Several neatly organized bundles of cash sat beneath folders and personal items. Not a few $100s. Not even a few thousand. Far more. Emma saw his expression change. What is it? Daniel exhaled slowly. A lot of money. The words barely captured what he was seeing. Important documents filled the interior compartments. Identification cards, business records, financial paperwork. Everything suggested the owner was someone with significant responsibilities. Someone who would be panicking right now. Daniel carefully searched for identification and eventually found a wallet. The moment he saw the driver's license photograph, he felt a strange mixture of surprise and disbelief. Emma watched him quietly. Do you know who it belongs to? Daniel stared at the card for several seconds. Olivia Bennett. The name seemed almost unreal sitting there in front of him. Less than 2 days earlier, she had signed paperwork ending his career. Less than 2 days earlier, she had looked across a conference table and decided he could not be trusted. Now her entire life appeared to be sitting inside a handbag resting in his hands. Emma noticed the expression on his face. Who is it? Daniel looked toward his daughter. My old boss. The answer hung quietly between them. Emma blinked. The one who fired you. Daniel nodded. Neither spoke for several moments. The noise of the parking lot seemed distant now. Shopping carts rolled past. Engines started. People loaded groceries into trunks. Yet Daniel's attention remained fixed on the bag. Inside rested enough money to solve many immediate problems. Mortgage payments, utility bills, school expenses. Job searches suddenly felt less urgent when thousands of dollars sat only inches away. The thought arrived naturally. Human. Impossible to ignore. Emma stared at the cash before looking back at her father. That is a lot. Daniel nodded again. Yes. He could feel the weight of the decision settling onto his shoulders. Not because he was tempted by greed. Because life had suddenly become difficult. Honest people often face their hardest tests when circumstances seemed unfair. Somewhere across the city, Olivia was likely making frantic phone calls. Security teams were probably searching offices and parking garages. Executives might already be discussing worst-case scenarios. Meanwhile, the person holding her missing belongings happened to be the same man she believed capable of stealing company funds. The irony felt almost impossible to ignore. Emma sat beside him on the bench. What are you going to do? Daniel looked at the driver's license again, then at the cash, then at the photograph of Olivia. The evening breeze moved gently through the parking lot. The world seemed to pause around him. Deep down, he already knew the answer. Yet knowing the right thing and facing it were not always the same, especially when life had just taken so much away. And as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the city skyline, Daniel realized that the next choice he made might define far more than his future. It might define who he remained when nobody was watching. Daniel Carter closed the handbag carefully and sat in silence for several moments. Evening shadows stretched across the grocery store parking lot while cars continued coming and going around him. The decision should have been simple. Return the bag. Yet life rarely tested people when doing the right thing felt easy. The real test came when circumstances made the wrong choice seem understandable. Emma watched her father closely. She could almost see the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What happens if you give it back? She asked. Daniel looked toward the city skyline, glowing in the distance. Nothing. The answer carried no bitterness, just honesty. Returning the bag would not restore his job. It would not repair his damaged reputation. It would not erase the accusations. Olivia Bennett might thank him. She might not. Either way, his own problems would still be waiting tomorrow morning. Emma considered this quietly. And what happens if you do not? Daniel smiled faintly. Then I become someone I do not want to be. Emma nodded immediately. The simplicity of childhood often revealed truths adults complicated. They gathered their groceries and headed home. The handbag remained safely zipped beside Daniel throughout the drive. Every traffic light seemed longer than usual. Every mile gave him more time to think. Mortgage payments, job applications, school expenses. The money inside that bag represented answers to problems he could not ignore. Yet it also represented something else. A line. A boundary between circumstances and character. Once crossed, some lines could never be uncrossed. Back at home, Daniel placed the handbag on the dining room table. Evening light filtered through the windows. Emma finished homework nearby while Daniel carefully reviewed the contents again. He wanted to ensure everything remained exactly as he found it. Identification cards, financial records, personal belongings, several sealed bundles of cash. Everything appeared untouched. He counted nothing, removed nothing, changed nothing. After locating a business card inside one compartment, he finally found a direct number connected to Olivia's executive office. For several seconds he stared at it. Then he picked up his phone and called. The line rang twice before reaching voicemail. Daniel hesitated after the tone. "Ms. Bennett, this is Daniel Carter. I believe I found something that belongs to you. Please call me back." He ended the call without further explanation. Hours passed. No response arrived. Across the city, Olivia remained trapped inside a whirlwind of phone calls and emergency meetings. Security teams continued searching. Executives attempted damage control. Lawyers reviewed potential risks. The missing handbag had become a growing crisis. Every passing hour increased the pressure. Yet somehow Daniel's voicemail remained buried beneath dozens of urgent notifications. Near 10 o'clock that evening, Emma emerged from her room, carrying a blanket. She noticed Daniel still sitting beside the handbag. "You are waiting." Daniel nodded. "I want to make sure it gets back to the right person." Emma looked at the expensive leather bag. "Most people would not do that." Daniel glanced toward her. "Maybe more people would than we think." Emma smiled before heading back upstairs. Left alone again, Daniel stared out the window. Rain had begun falling lightly across the neighborhood. Streetlights reflected against wet pavement. Somewhere beyond those lights sat the woman who believed he had stolen company money. The irony remained impossible to ignore. If Olivia knew who possessed her missing belongings right now, she would probably feel nervous, suspicious, maybe even afraid. After all, she already believed him capable of dishonesty. The thought should have made him angry. Instead, it made him sad. Shortly before midnight, Daniel's phone finally rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. He answered immediately. The voice on the other end sounded exhausted, stressed, almost desperate. "This is Olivia Bennett." Silence followed. Neither spoke for a moment. 2 days earlier they sat across a conference table. Now circumstances had placed them in a very different conversation. Olivia spoke again. "You said you found something." Daniel looked toward the handbag resting beside him. The room felt unusually still. "Yes," he said calmly. "I think I found what you have been searching for." On the other end of the line, silence arrived so suddenly that it seemed to stop time itself. The silence on the phone lasted several seconds longer than either expected. Daniel Carter could almost hear Olivia Bennett processing what she had just heard. Somewhere across the city, one of the most powerful executives in Chicago was sitting awake near midnight, surrounded by stress, uncertainty, and questions. And the person holding the answer happened to be the man she had accused of stealing. "You found it?" Olivia finally asked. Her voice sounded careful now, much different from the controlled confidence she carried inside the conference room. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Everything appears to be intact." Another pause followed. Then a quiet exhale. Relief. Genuine relief. "Where is it?" Daniel glanced toward the handbag resting on the dining room table. "At my house." Olivia hesitated. "Can we arrange a pickup tonight?" The request was understandable. Important documents remained inside. Financial information, personal records, cash. Yet something about the question revealed how desperate the situation had become. Daniel looked toward the staircase leading upstairs where Emma slept peacefully. "It is almost midnight." Olivia seemed to realize the same thing. "You are right." Her tone softened. "Tomorrow morning?" Daniel nodded, even though she could not see him. "Tomorrow works." After agreeing on a time and location, the call ended. The house became quiet again. Rain continued falling outside. Daniel sat alone for several minutes, staring at the handbag. The conversation had been surprisingly brief. No apology. No discussion about the accusation. No acknowledgement of what had happened between them. Just the missing bag. Yet somehow that felt appropriate. Some truths required more than a phone call. The next morning arrived gray and cool. Daniel woke early, unable to sleep much. He brewed coffee and prepared breakfast before Emma came downstairs. She immediately noticed the handbag still sitting on the table. "Today is the day?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Looks that way." Emma sat down across from him. "Are you nervous?" The question surprised him. He considered it carefully before answering. "Maybe." Emma tilted her head. "Why?" Daniel looked out the kitchen window. Because sometimes doing the right thing does not feel as good as people expect. Emma thought about that. You are still doing it. Yes. Then maybe that is what matters. Daniel laughed softly. Once again, his daughter managed to simplify something adults complicated. Later that morning, he drove toward downtown Chicago. The handbag rested on the passenger seat exactly where he had placed it. Every item remained untouched. The city skyline gradually appeared ahead as traffic thickened. Familiar buildings passed by. Streets he once traveled every workday now felt strangely distant. Meanwhile, inside Bennett Financial headquarters, Olivia stood near her office window, watching the city below. She had barely slept. The missing handbag crisis had dominated the previous 24 hours. Yet now a different thought occupied her mind. Daniel Carter. She replayed the facts repeatedly. A recently terminated employee. A man accused of taking company funds. A person facing financial uncertainty. Yet when presented with an opportunity involving a significant amount of cash, he had called her instead. The contradiction bothered her. Not because she disliked good news. Because it challenged assumptions she had accepted as fact. Shortly before noon, Daniel arrived at a quiet cafe, located a few blocks from the corporate headquarters. Olivia had suggested the location herself. Neutral territory. Public. Professional. Daniel chose a table near the window and waited. The handbag remained beside his chair. People moved through the cafe carrying coffee cups and laptops. Conversations drifted through the room. Life continued normally around him. Yet beneath the ordinary atmosphere sat an uncomfortable reality. In a few minutes, he would come face to face with the woman who had changed his life. The door opened. Olivia entered. Her professional appearance remained flawless as always, but something about her expression looked different. Less certain. More thoughtful. For a brief moment, both simply stood there. Two people connected by circumstances neither could have predicted. Then Olivia noticed the handbag resting beside Daniel's chair. Relief immediately crossed her face. Real relief. The kind no executive training could manufacture. She walked toward the table slowly. Neither spoke at first. The noise of the cafe seemed to fade into the background. Because sitting between them was not just a lost handbag. It was a question. A question neither of them was fully prepared to answer. Olivia Bennett stopped beside the table and looked at the handbag as if she could hardly believe it was real. For nearly 24 hours, that bag had been the center of panic, emergency meetings, sleepless phone calls, and endless uncertainty. Now it sat quietly beside the man she had fired. The contrast felt impossible to ignore. Daniel stood politely. Neither reached for a handshake. Neither seemed certain how to begin. Finally, Olivia sat down across from him. The sounds of the cafe returned slowly. Cups clinked against saucers. Conversations drifted through the room. Yet between them, a different conversation was already taking shape. Daniel slid the handbag across the table. Everything should be there. Olivia opened it immediately. Her hands moved quickly at first, then more slowly as she confirmed the contents. Identification. Documents. Personal items. Cash. Nothing appeared missing. Nothing appeared disturbed. Relief washed across her face. For the first time since entering the cafe, she looked genuinely emotional. Everything is here, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Good. The simplicity of his response seemed to catch her off guard. No speech. No lecture. No attempt to make her feel guilty. Just a calm acknowledgement that the bag had returned where it belonged. Olivia closed the handbag and stared at it for several seconds. Then she looked back at Daniel. You could have kept it. Daniel shrugged slightly. It was not mine. Again, the answer sounded almost too simple. Yet that was exactly what made it powerful. Olivia lowered her eyes briefly. Somewhere in another version of events, she had expected anger, resentment, maybe even an attempt to negotiate. Instead, she was sitting across from a man who had lost his job, lost his reputation, and still chosen honesty. The contradiction became harder to ignore with every passing minute. Do you know how much cash was inside? She asked carefully. Daniel looked out the window for a moment. Enough. Olivia studied him. Most people would have at least counted it. A faint smile appeared on Daniel's face. I did not need to know the number. The conversation slowed. The weight of unspoken history filled the space between them. Finally, Olivia asked the question that had been following her since the night before. Why did you return it? Daniel looked at her directly. Not with anger. Not with accusation. Simply honesty. Because it was yours. The answer landed harder than either expected. Outside the cafe window, pedestrians moved through downtown Chicago beneath bright afternoon skies. Inside, silence settled over the table. Olivia found herself struggling to look away. The more she listened to him, the less the image of a thief made sense. Her mind returned again to the conference room, the investigation, the evidence, the certainty she had felt. Yet certainty no longer felt certain. "You must be angry with me," she said. Daniel thought about the question. "I was disappointed." Olivia lowered her eyes. Somehow that word hurt more than anger would have. Disappointment suggested trust lost, respect damaged, something more personal than professional conflict. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen. A message from the internal audit department. Normally, she would have ignored it during a conversation. Something compelled her to open it immediately. Her expression changed almost at once. The message was short, urgent. Additional review had uncovered discrepancies inside the original investigation. Several records required immediate verification. Olivia read the message twice. Then a third time. The blood seemed to drain from her face. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. Olivia slowly lowered the phone. For the first time since they met, uncertainty was visible in her eyes. Real uncertainty. The kind that appears when a person realizes a story they believed may not be complete. Daniel remained calm. He did not ask questions. He did not demand explanations. Yet the silence between them suddenly felt different. Larger. Heavier. Olivia looked at him across the table and saw not the employee she had terminated, but the man who had just returned everything she feared was lost. The contrast became impossible to escape. Outside, sunlight reflected from nearby office towers. Inside, a truth neither could fully see yet was beginning to move beneath the surface. And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, Olivia found herself wondering whether the biggest mistake was not losing the handbag at all. Olivia Bennett remained seated long after reading the message from the audit department. The busy sounds of the cafe seemed distant now. For the first time in years, certainty had abandoned her. She looked across the table at Daniel Carter and saw something she had failed to see before. Not a suspect, not a problem to solve, not a file on her desk. A person, a father, a man who had every reason to walk away from her troubles and yet had chosen integrity instead. Daniel noticed the conflict on her face, but remained silent. Some moments did not need words. They needed space. Finally, Olivia spoke. The audit team found errors in the investigation. Her voice was quieter than usual. "They are reviewing everything again." Daniel absorbed the information calmly. No celebration crossed his face. No satisfaction. Just a slow nod. "I see." Olivia lowered her eyes. "I should have looked deeper." The admission seemed difficult for her. Perhaps more difficult than any boardroom negotiation she had ever faced. Success had taught her how to lead. Failure was teaching her how to listen. Over the next 48 hours, the truth emerged completely. A senior financial analyst had manipulated records to hide personal misconduct. The altered data had pointed investigators toward Daniel. The evidence that appeared solid had never been complete. Once the missing pieces surfaced, the entire case collapsed. The company board moved quickly. The analyst was terminated. Internal procedures were reviewed. Formal reports were corrected. Yet paperwork could not erase what had already happened. Daniel had lost his position. His reputation had suffered. Emma had watched her father carry a burden he did not deserve. Some consequences could not simply be edited away. 3 days later, Daniel received an invitation to return to company headquarters. The same building that had witnessed his dismissal now awaited his arrival under very different circumstances. As he entered the executive conference room, familiar faces looked back at him. This time their expressions carried something new. Humility. Respect. Olivia stood at the head of the table. When Daniel entered, she rose immediately. No presentation slides appeared on the screen. No legal language filled the room. Only honesty. "Mr. Carter," she began, "we were wrong." The room fell silent. "You were accused unfairly. You were judged too quickly. And despite everything, you demonstrated more character than anyone could have expected." Daniel listened quietly. Olivia continued. "The board has approved your full reinstatement with back pay. But before discussing any position, I wanted to apologize personally." The words seemed simple, yet they carried real weight because they were sincere. Daniel looked around the room. Weeks earlier, he might have imagined this moment differently. Anger, vindication, satisfaction. Instead, he felt something unexpected. Peace. Because true dignity does not require revenge. It only requires truth. "Thank you," he said softly. That was all. No speech. No humiliation. No attempt to make anyone suffer. The strength of his response came from its grace. Several weeks later, life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel returned to work, this time with a level of respect that no title alone could provide. Emma proudly told her friends that her father had done the right thing even when nobody was watching. And Olivia carried a different lesson forward. Leadership was not about always being right. It was about having the courage to admit when you were wrong. One afternoon, she passed Daniel in the company lobby. They stopped briefly to talk. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Just two people who had learned something valuable about trust. As Daniel stepped outside, sunlight reflected across the city streets. The future still contained challenges. Life always did. But some victories arrived quietly. Not with applause. Not with headlines. Simply with the knowledge that character survives every storm. And sometimes, the person who loses everything for doing right eventually gains something far more valuable than success. Respect. If this story reminded you that integrity matters even when life feels unfair, share your thoughts below. Tell us what you would have done in Daniel's place. And if you believe quiet dignity still has a place in this world, consider joining us for more stories about second chances, grace, and the kind of courage that speaks softly but leaves a lasting mark.